A competition between America and China is creating a new order in space. But even these titanic superpowers won't be able to handle the rigors of space exploration on their own. The idea of people residing and working on other planets, maybe within the next 10 years, is among the most expensive and technically difficult aims to date. However, in a divided world where international goodwill is rare, are such goals realistic? With the launch of its Artemis mission, NASA has begun its return to the moon. 3 missions have been launched, the first of which was successful. The rockets and technology were put to the test during an unmanned flight. The third launch will send astronauts to the moon for a week to conduct experiments, and the second mission will propel humans farther into space than they have ever traveled. The long-term objective is to reach Mars using the moon as a launching pad. However, the scheme is expected to cost $93 billion, a hefty price tag for American taxpayers who are already feeling the pinch. The U.S. Auditor General's office warned of an unrealistic development timetable and potential overruns in a report to Congress last year, adding that NASA needed to make cost estimates more trustworthy and transparent. Nevertheless, despite the fact that Congress will give NASA less money overall than it requested in 2023, it continues to support its missions to explore space for people. Tiangong, China's own fully functional space station, was launched on schedule. Chinese spacecraft have sent probes to Mars and the Moon. By 2025, it intends to set up an unmanned research outpost on the Moon, and by 2030, astronauts would touch down there. The Moon has been occupied by astronauts before, but going to Mars is a considerably harder step. There is currently no spaceship that can deliver people to the Red Planet, which is 250 times farther away than the Moon. The challenge of returning the men safely to Earth after months in space still remains, even if scientists are able to launch a fuel-heavy rocket and land it on a planet with such a low atmosphere. Superpowers have historically competed for dominance above the Earth. In the 1950s and 60s, America and Russia fought one another for supremacy. The first man was put into orbit by the Russians. A few years later, the Americans set up their flag and put a man on the moon. A golden age of collaboration was established in the 1970s and culminated in the International Space Station project, which got underway in 1998. The two superpowers erected what is currently the largest structure in space, along with 13 other cooperating nations. No one country owns it, and each needs the other to function. It served as a metaphor for what humanity could accomplish if all countries set aside their differences and collaborated. But the truth was a little different. China took their own path after being prevented by America from joining as a partner of the ISS, which is notable. More recently, countries stopped cooperating with Russia just a few weeks after the invasion of Ukraine. The European Space Agency and Russia have cancelled 2 cooperative moon projects, as well as a combined Mars rover mission to look for indications of life on the Red Planet. However, dig beneath the surface and cooperation can be seen on the ISS, where Western nations and Russia must cooperate to keep it in space. Even today, Americans and Europeans train in Russia's space headquarters, Star City, in the heart of Moscow. But what will happen when the ISS reaches the end of its operational life in 2030? Russia no longer has as much to offer partner countries as it once had. According to Juliana Seuss, a space policy specialist at the Royal United Services Institute think tank in London, she suggests that the first country into space might also be the first one out. Quote, "It might not have any human spaceflight," she warns, "if the Russians haven't figured out an alternative by the time the ISS is decommissioned or constructs its own space station, which, given the current conditions and sanctions, is highly improbable." End quote. At a time when China's space program is expanding quickly, Russia is in a difficult situation. Even though China currently spends less on space than America does, China has launched more than 200 rockets in the last 10 years. China is aware that collaborations may provide both money and technical know-how. It has issued a request for proposals for scientific research and urged other nations barred from access to the ISS to join them. Due to the fact that they cannot afford to fall behind in the new space competition, 72 nations currently have their own space programs. Our daily lives depend on space in so many ways. Satellites are essential for banking, communications, weather forecasts, and important surveillance equipment for governments. And the outside is becoming busy. Approximately 5,000 satellites were launched in 2021. In the previous 20 years, 800 or so were introduced yearly. The space industry is expansive and technically challenging. No one nation can accomplish it alone. New alliances are being formed, particularly with the brash new billionaires. SpaceX, a firm run by Elon Musk, has already launched passengers into orbit. The multi-billionaire businessman is reducing costs by using a reusable rocket. Not to be outdone, Jeff Bezos of Amazon intends to construct Orbital Reef, a for-profit orbiting outpost. Helen Sharman, the first astronaut from the UK, feels that the pragmatism of the private sector might put the current geopolitical rivalry in the background. Helen Sharman served on the mission to the Soviet space station Mir in 1991. She told the BBC that commercialization truly is going to be what draws companies together globally. Where they are registered doesn't matter. What counts is what they do for the good of the world. Collaboration is motivated by the possibility of financial benefit and scientific discovery. Private firms may contribute to a new era of space collaboration, but they must abide by local legal requirements. Businesses were forced to cancel contracts with Russia in 2022 as countries imposed sanctions on them. The head of the European Space Agency, Dr. Josef Aschbacher, is adamant about keeping Europe in the current space race. Despite the financial pressure governments are under, he recently received a boost in financing of $2.4 billion. Quote, "One of those industries that is growing considerably more quickly than it did in previous decades is space. We must succeed or else," he said. "I want to generate new business prospects for enterprises in our member states to participate in. Therefore, we really need to participate heavily in this industry. Future leaders in space exploration will be countries. However, the difficulties will call for them to unite as a single nation or bloc in order to share knowledge and compete with other nations. This is something that the European Space Agency has been doing well for a while. The collection of international laws controlling space, however, could impede the next major exploration of other planets. Since it was signed in 1967 by 31 countries, including the US and the Soviet Union, promising not to have nuclear weapons in space, the aptly named Outer Space Treaty has not been amended. It is not suitable for purpose, according to Juliana Seuss of the Royal United Services Institute. Quote, "It doesn't talk about businesses or billionaires," she remarked. "Space has completely changed from what it was in 1967. End quote. The UN adopted new rules in 1979 to control commercial exploration of the Moon, Mars, and beyond. But the US, China, and Russia have all refused to ratify them. According to Josef Aschbacher of the ESA, the new space race will be hindered until a new space treaty is negotiated. In space, he remarked, China, the US, and Europe are using the same orbits for satellites and the same lunar surface. We must find a way to cooperate in order to create ground rules for conduct and how we carry out our duties. Thus, the question arises, with all these geopolitical issues and the participation of the private sector, can the leading nations in space exploration find an impasse for the good of all mankind? What do you think? Comment your thoughts below. Thank you so much for watching the video. Don't miss out on our latest uploads. If you wish to stay up to date with the latest space updates and discoveries, hit the subscribe button, like the video, and turn on all notifications to see more of our latest videos in the future.